Have you ever dreamed of stepping through time, not just as a curious observer, but to truly walk the streets of history's greatest cities, breathe the air of another age, and witness legendary figures in their prime? I'm talking about ancient Athens, the luminous heart of classical Greece, where philosophy, democracy, and art converged in one breathtaking moment in time. And what if I told you that tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you could journey there with me? We're about to embark on a voyage unlike any other, a sleepy time travel adventure back to the 5th century before the Common Era. A time when Socrates questioned passers-by in the Agora, when the Parthenon gleamed new upon the Acropolis, and when the very idea of democracy was being born, debated, and defended in the open air. Before we set off, we'd love to know where in the world are you joining us from tonight, and what time does your journey into rest begin? Let us know in the comments below. Every time I read your comments, it feels like we're building a community of dreamers and time travelers, scattered across the globe but connected through these quiet, imaginative hours. Tonight, we aren't just studying history, we're going to live it. Picture this: the warm Mediterranean sun on your skin, the scent of olive groves and saltwater carried on the breeze, the distant hum of a city alive with ideas, markets, and mysteries. This is Athens at its peak, a place that shaped the Western world and still captures our imagination more than 2,000 years later. We'll wander through bustling streets where everyday Athenians bartered, debated, and dreamed. We'll listen in on conversations that would one day become the foundation of philosophy and science, and we'll stand in the shadow of architectural marvels that continue to awe visitors to this very day. But this journey is more than a history lesson. It's an invitation to experience the soul of a civilization. It's about understanding not just what happened, but how it felt to be there. And the best part, you don't need a time machine. All you need is your imagination and a willingness to unwind, relax, and let your mind drift into the past. So get comfortable, let your breathing slow, and allow the sounds and sensations of the modern world to gently fade away. In a moment, we'll step across the centuries, leaving behind today's worries and wonders to explore a city of thinkers, artists, warriors, and visionaries. From the whispering echoes of the theater of Dionysus to the grand processions along the Panathenaic Way, we'll uncover the layers of this ancient metropolis, its brilliance, its contradictions, and the timeless stories hidden in its stones. Whether you're here to learn, to escape, or simply to dream, this journey is for you. So let's begin. Close your eyes if you like, take a deep breath in, and let's travel back to the glory of ancient Athens. Picture the world of the 5th century before the Common Era. Across the globe, empires are rising and falling, but here, on this rocky peninsula jutting into the Aegean Sea, something entirely new is taking root. This is Athens, a city-state or polis that is not just a place on a map, but an idea coming to life. It is a city of perhaps 300,000 souls, though only around 40 to 50,000 are citizens with a voice in its revolutionary government. A system they called democratia, rule by the people. This wasn't a democracy as we might picture it today, but a direct democracy where male citizens gathered in assemblies to debate, vote, and shape the laws themselves. There was no president, no Congress, just the collective will of the people, voiced in the open air. This incredible confidence and ambition didn't emerge from a vacuum. Just decades earlier, Athens, alongside a coalition of Greek city-states, had achieved the impossible. They had repelled the invading forces of the vast Persian Empire. From that victory, Athens emerged not just as a survivor, but as a leader. It formed and helmed the Delian League, an alliance of cities initially meant as a defensive pact against future Persian threats. Over time, the League's treasury moved to Athens, and those funds, contributed by allies, helped fuel an unprecedented burst of creativity and construction. This period, now known as the Athenian Golden Age, was a perfect storm of political innovation, military power, and economic prosperity that created the ideal conditions for a cultural explosion. Now, let's step into the atmosphere of this city. The air is a complex tapestry of smells: the sharp tang of salt from the nearby port of Piraeus, the earthy aroma of olive oil and leather from the workshops, the scent of baking bread and roasting meat from the food stalls, and not to be ignored, the underlying odor of a dense human population living without modern sanitation. The city is a constant hum of activity. From the crack of dawn, the agora, the central public space, is alive with the sounds of commerce and conversation. Craftsmen hammer metal, politicians argue passionately on the steps of public buildings, and philosophers like the formidable Socrates engage anyone willing in probing dialogues about justice, virtue, and the good life. Your eyes would be drawn upward always to the Acropolis. This massive limestone rock rising high above the city is the spiritual and ceremonial heart of Athens. And upon its peak, gleaming in the brilliant Greek sun, is the magnificent Parthenon. It's not the aged, off-white ruin we see today, but a stunningly new temple, its marble surfaces painted in vibrant shades of blue, red, and gold, adorned with intricate sculptures telling the stories of the gods and the city's own legendary past. It stands as the ultimate symbol of Athenian confidence, a declaration of their cultural and artistic supremacy, paid for by the wealth of their empire. This is the vibrant, noisy, and intellectually charged world we are about to walk through together. As you take that final deep breath and let your mind drift, feel the solid ground beneath your feet begin to shift. The familiar sensations of your room dissolve, replaced by a new and profound warmth. It's the heat of a Grecian sun, high in a sky of impossible blue, its light falling upon your skin not as a harsh glare, but as a gentle, life-giving embrace. The air you now breathe is different. It carries the dry, dusty scent of sun-baked earth and stone, mingled with the unmistakable fragrance of olive groves from the nearby hills, a clean, slightly bitter aroma that speaks of the land itself. Open your eyes. You are standing on a narrow, unpaved street, its surface trodden hard by countless feet. The first thing that strikes you is the noise. It's not the uniform hum of a modern city, but a vibrant, layered symphony of human life. From a short distance away comes the chaotic, energetic din of the agora, the city's pulsating heart. You can hear the sharp clink of metal from a blacksmith's workshop, the rhythmic tapping of a stone carver's chisel, and the animated, overlapping voices of merchants hawking their wares: figs, wine, pottery, and woven cloth. A donkey brays loudly, and the sound of bartering rises and falls in waves. Above it all, the sound of conversation is everywhere: passionate debates, friendly greetings, and serious discussions happening in the open air, as if the entire city is one great, ongoing public meeting. Now, let the sounds guide your gaze upward above the red-tiled roofs of the houses and workshops. There it is, an undeniable presence that dominates the skyline, the Acropolis. This isn't a distant monument you visit. It is the soul of the city, a massive, sacred rock that watches over everything. And perched atop it, the Parthenon stands in its full, breathtaking glory. Forget the pale, weathered ruins we know today. The temple you see now is almost blindingly brilliant, its pentelic marble surfaces catching the sun and reflecting it back with a soft, warm glow. But it's not just white. Look closer and you'll see flashes of vivid color, deep blues and reds and shimmering gold leaf adorning the sculpted scenes along its friezes and pediments. It is a testament to human ambition, a declaration of pride and devotion that seems to touch the heavens. As you begin to walk, the ground feels uneven beneath your sandals. The air close to the street level carries a more complex character. Along with the pleasant smells of wood smoke and baking bread, there's the pungent odor of animal sacrifices from a nearby sanctuary, the scent of burning incense drifting from a household shrine, and the inevitable earthy smells of a dense population living closely with animals and without modern waste disposal. It's a raw, unfiltered reality that grounds you in the time. You pass a public fountain house where women gather, their voices mingling with the sound of splashing water as they fill their clay jars, their colorful robes creating a moving tapestry against the sun-bleached stone. This is not a sterile museum exhibit. It is a living, breathing, and wonderfully messy world, and you are now a quiet witness to its daily rhythm. Our path now leads us upward toward that breathtaking sight that has commanded our attention since we arrived. We are approaching the Acropolis, the high city. This isn't just a hill, it is the most sacred ground in Athens, a fortified citadel that is both a spiritual sanctuary and an undeniable statement of civic power. The climb itself feels like a pilgrimage, a gradual ascent from the noisy, everyday world of the agora toward something transcendent. As we walk the winding path, the sounds of the city begin to soften, replaced by the whisper of the wind and the determined footsteps of other visitors making their own way up. Passing through the monumental entrance, the Propylaea, is an experience designed to overwhelm the senses. This grand gateway, with its rows of massive columns and painted ceilings, isn't merely a door, it's a deliberate transition from the profane to the profound. It prepares you for the spectacle within, building a sense of awe and anticipation, and then you step through and the heart of the Acropolis opens before you. The space is not cluttered, it is a carefully arranged tableau of artistic and religious devotion, and standing proudly at its center is the Parthenon. To call the Parthenon a temple is almost an understatement. It is the ultimate expression of confidence, a masterpiece of Doric architecture that achieves perfection through a series of brilliant optical illusions. At first glance, it appears perfectly straight and symmetrical, but look closer. Its base curves slightly upward to counter the human eye's tendency to see a sag in long, flat surfaces. Its columns bulge gently in the middle and tilt inward, all to create a sense of dynamic energy and stability, making the entire structure appear alive and resilient against the elements. This wasn't just construction, it was high art in marble, a collaboration of the finest architects, sculptors, and artisans of the age, led by the visionary sculptor Phidias. And inside, awaiting in the dim, incense-filled chamber, was Phidias's crowning achievement, the statue of Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin. Imagine a figure so immense she seemed to touch the ceiling, crafted from ivory for her skin, and a staggering amount of gleaming gold for her robe and armor. She held a statue of the goddess Nike in one hand, a symbol of victory, and rested the other on a shield depicting epic battles. This was more than a religious icon. She was the protector of the city, a divine guardian whose very presence justified Athenian leadership and celebrated their victories. The vast treasury of the Delian League was stored in her chamber, intertwining her spiritual power with the city's material wealth and military might. The Parthenon, therefore, served a dual soul. It was, without question, a deeply sacred place, the home of the city's patron deity, where rituals and offerings were made to ensure her continued favor. But it was also the most powerful propaganda tool of its time. Every aspect of its design, from the majestic sculptures depicting the gods to the frieze showing Athenian citizens in a grand procession, communicated a single, powerful message to both Athenians and visitors from rival states. Athens was not just a political power, it was the cultural and intellectual center of the Greek world, blessed by the gods and superior to all others. It was the physical embodiment of their golden age, a symbol of their pride that was meant to endure for eternity. But to truly understand Athenian life, we must descend from the divine heights of the Acropolis and re-enter the bustling human world below. For the true heartbeat of the city wasn't found on the sacred rock, but in the agora, the sprawling public square that served as the living room, the boardroom, and the town hall of ancient Athens. If the Acropolis was the city's soul, the Agora was its body and its mind, a chaotic and vibrant center of commerce, conversation, and civic duty. Imagine stepping into the main public square, a vast open space humming with an energy that is both familiar and utterly foreign. The air here is thick with the scent of spices, freshly baked bread, and the earthy smell of produce from the surrounding farms. Your ears are met with a symphony of sounds, the clatter of coins on stone counters, the lively bartering between merchants and customers, the lowing of cattle being brought to market, and most distinctly, the animated hum of countless conversations. This is where Athens came to talk, to trade, and to govern itself. Scattered throughout the open square are temporary stalls and more permanent shops where you can find virtually anything the ancient world had to offer. A potter proudly displays his finely painted vases depicting myths and daily life. A fishmonger shouts about his fresh catch from the Aegean. You might see a farmer selling olives, figs, and grapes, his goods arranged in woven baskets. But the Agora was far more than a marketplace. Flanking the open plaza were some of the most important civic buildings in the city. The Stoa of Apollos, a magnificent two-story colonnade, provided shade and shelter for Athenians to meet, stroll, and discuss business protected from the sun or rain. Its long, open design, supported by rows of sturdy columns, created a perfect promenade for socializing and intellectual exchange. At the other end of the square stood the Tholos, a distinctive circular building with a conical roof. This unassuming structure held immense importance as it served as the headquarters for the executive committee of the Council of 500, the body that prepared the agenda for the larger assembly. Here, 50 council members chosen by lot would eat their meals together at public expense and be on call to handle any state emergencies at all hours, making it the literal operational heart of Athenian democracy. It was in the Agora that the great philosopher Socrates could be found, not lecturing from a podium, but engaging anyone he met in his unique style of questioning, challenging their assumptions about justice, truth, and beauty right there in the public thoroughfare. It was also the place where ordinary citizens would gather to hear the latest news, read official decrees posted on stone steels, and then climb the nearby hill to the Phoenix to cast their votes in the assembly, directly shaping the laws of their city. The Agora was the essential stage upon which the great democratic experiment of Athens was performed every single day. Leaving the bustling energy of the Agora behind, our journey through Athens now takes us to a place where the city's deepest fears, greatest hopes, and most complex moral questions were brought to life. Nestled on the southern slope of the Acropolis, carved directly into the living rock, lies the Theatre of Dionysus. This is not merely an entertainment venue, it is the very cradle of Western drama, the sacred ground where the art of theatre was born. Here, under the open sky, the Athenians gathered by the thousands to participate in something far more profound than a simple play. They engaged in a communal ritual that was essential to the health of their democracy and their souls. Approaching the theatre, the first thing you notice is its sheer scale. It is a semi-circular bowl facing a flat stage area and a simple wooden backdrop, all set against the stunning vista of the Athenian landscape. The seating, the theatron or seeing place, is a vast array of stone benches rising up the hillside, capable of holding an audience of up to 17,000 people. From the very back rows, the actors on the stage below would appear small, but the acoustics are nothing short of miraculous. A coin dropped in the circular orchestra, the dancing floor at the center, can be heard clearly from the highest seat, a testament to brilliant design that allowed every citizen, from the wealthy elite in the front rows to the humble shoemaker in the back, to hear every word spoken and every chord sung. This gathering reached its peak during the city Dionysia, the great annual festival held in honor of Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and transformation. For several days each spring, the entire city would essentially shut down for a dramatic competition unlike any other. Business was suspended, prisoners were temporarily released from jail, and even the city's finances were open to public scrutiny, all to ensure that every citizen could participate. This was far more than a holiday, it was a civic and religious obligation. The plays performed here were not just stories, they were intense, often unsettling explorations of the human condition. Through the medium of tragedy, playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides forced their fellow Athenians to confront the most difficult questions of their time. They grappled with the nature of justice in Antigone, the perils of hubris in Oedipus Rex, and the devastating cost of war in the Trojan Women. These performances held a mirror up to the polis, challenging the audience to reflect on their own values, their leaders, and the very foundations of their society. But the festival was not solely a somber affair. The days were also filled with the uproarious laughter provoked by comic geniuses like Aristophanes. His plays, such as The Clouds and Lysistrata, were sharp, bawdy, and brutally satirical, fearlessly mocking prominent politicians, philosophers like Socrates, and the city's own follies. In a society that prized free speech, comedy served as a vital pressure valve, allowing citizens to laugh at themselves and their leaders, reinforcing the democratic principle that no one was above being questioned, even if it was through a joke. The cultural importance of this theater cannot be overstated. Attending these performances was considered a fundamental part of being an Athenian citizen. It was here that the community collectively processed the trauma of war, the tensions of political life, and the ethical dilemmas of their empire. The theater was a classroom for civic virtue, a temple for spiritual inquiry, and a public forum for social critique, all rolled into one. By witnessing these stories together, the audience participated in a shared experience that strengthened their cultural identity and reinforced the bonds of their democracy, reminding everyone that the fate of the city, much like the fate of a tragic hero, was a collective responsibility. Yet even in this world of human debate and democratic action, the Athenians understood that some questions were too great for mortal wisdom alone. For guidance on matters of state, for decisions that would shape the fate of their empire, they often looked beyond their walls to a place they believed was the very center of the world. High on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, shrouded in mist and mystery, lay the sanctuary of Delphi, home to the most powerful oracle in all of Greece. While Delphi was not within Athenian territory, the connection between the city of reason and this center of divine prophecy was incredibly strong, a vital thread in the fabric of Athenian political and spiritual life. The journey to Delphi was an arduous one, a multi-day trek northwest from Athens. Statesmen, generals, and ordinary citizens alike would make the pilgrimage along the sacred way, climbing ever higher into the rugged mountains. Their destination was the Temple of Apollo, and within it the most enigmatic figure in the ancient world, the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo who served as the oracle's mouthpiece. The process of seeking a prophecy was a formal and expensive affair. A city like Athens would send a delegation of respected envoys. Upon arrival, they would first offer a sacrifice, a prized animal whose organs were examined by priests for favorable omens. If the signs were good, they would be granted an audience. Then came the moment of truth. The Pythia would descend into a sunken chamber within the temple, said to be filled with vapors rising from a crack in the earth. There, seated on a tripod cauldron, she would enter a trance-like state, possibly induced by the gases, chewing laurel leaves or drinking from a sacred spring. In this altered consciousness, she would deliver the words of the god Apollo, often in riddles, cryptic verses, or unintelligible utterances. Temple priests, known as the Hosioi or Holy Ones, would then interpret her sounds and translate them into the elegant, ambiguous hexameter verses that became the famous Delphic oracles. The great Athenian statesman Pericles, the mastermind behind the Parthenon and the leader of Athens during its golden age, was a frequent consultor of the oracle. Before embarking on major military campaigns or significant political reforms, he and his advisors would seek the blessing and guidance of the Pythia. This was not a sign of weakness or superstition, but a shrewd political and diplomatic tool. Having the divine sanction of Delphi could unite the citizenry behind a controversial decision, lend immense credibility to a leader's plans, and send a powerful message to rival states that Athens was acting with the favor of the gods. The prophecies themselves were legendary for their double meanings. The most famous example, though not Athenian, is the prophecy given to King Croesus of Lydia, who was told that if he attacked the Persians, he would destroy a great empire. He did his own. This ambiguity was a feature, not a bug. It placed the ultimate responsibility back on the seeker to interpret the message wisely, forcing leaders to combine divine insight with their own human reason and judgment. For Athens, a city that celebrated logic and debate, the mysterious words from Delphi provided not a simple answer, but the starting point for even deeper discussion, a divine puzzle to be solved by the collective wisdom of the polis. This interplay between the rational and the mystical, the democratic assembly and the solitary priestess, reveals a more complex Athenian reality, a society that built the foundations of Western reason while still leaving room for the powerful, unexplainable mystery of the divine. Yet for all its cultural and political brilliance, the true source of Athens' immense power and the engine of its golden age was not just on land, it was at sea. The story of how a city-state with limited natural resources and a small territory became the dominant naval force in the Mediterranean is one of foresight, innovation, and a desperate fight for survival. To understand this, we must travel a short distance from the city's center to its vital lifeline, the bustling port of Piraeus. This wasn't merely a harbor. It was a fortified, state-of-the-art military and commercial complex that served as the beating heart of the Athenian Empire. Three natural harbors, Kantharos, Z, and Munichia, provided secure anchorage for the greatest fleet the ancient world had ever seen. The most crucial of these innovations were the ship sheds, long, roofed slipways built on a monumental scale. These structures were the ancient equivalent of a naval dry dock, designed to protect the city's most valuable assets, its warships, from the two greatest threats to wooden vessels: the relentless Mediterranean sun, which could dry out and crack the hulls, and the destructive marine worms known as shipworms, which would bore into the wood and destroy it. By housing the fleet ashore, the Athenians ensured their ships remained seaworthy and ready for action at a moment's notice, a logistical advantage that was absolutely critical to maintaining their naval supremacy. The crown jewel of this fleet was the trireme, a warship that represented the pinnacle of ancient military technology. This was a vessel built for a single, devastating purpose: speed and ramming power. Approximately 120 feet long but only 20 feet wide, its sleek, lightweight design was achieved through a delicate framework that gave it incredible agility. Its name came from its 3 tiers of oarsmen stacked on each side, with 170 rowers working in perfect, synchronized unison. A skilled crew could propel this human-powered missile to speeds of up to 9 knots in a short burst, turning it into a massive underwater battering ram. The primary weapon was its bronze-clad ram, a protrusion at the front designed to splinter the hull of an enemy ship below the waterline, sinking it in minutes. A successful trireme attack was a thing of terrifying precision and violence, a sudden, explosive impact followed by the chaos of splintering wood and desperate men in the water. Commanding this floating weapon was a delicate art. The ship's kybernetes, or helmsman, had to judge the perfect angle of attack, while the trierarch, the wealthy citizen who financed the ship's operation for a year, bore immense responsibility for its success. The man who first saw this nautical future for Athens was the visionary statesman Themistocles. In the early 5th century before the Common Era, a massive silver vein was discovered in the state-owned mines at Laurium. The public clamored for the vast wealth to be distributed equally among all citizens, but Themistocles, with remarkable foresight, persuaded the Athenian assembly to do something radically different. He argued they should invest the entire windfall into building a navy of 200 triremes. His argument was rooted in a clear and present danger, the looming threat of a second invasion from the colossal Persian Empire. His gamble paid off spectacularly. When the Persian king Xerxes invaded Greece in 480 BC with a colossal armada, it was this new Athenian fleet, following Themistocles' strategic genius, that lured the larger Persian ships into the narrow straits of Salamis. In that confined space, the nimble Athenian triremes could outmaneuver their opponents, resulting in a stunning victory that shattered Persian naval power and saved Greece. From that moment forward, Athens was the undisputed master of the Aegean Sea. This naval dominance didn't just bring military security, it forged an empire. The Delian League, initially a defensive alliance, quickly evolved into an Athenian maritime hegemony. Member states, particularly those on islands and along coastlines, found it easier to pay tribute in money rather than provide ships. Athens used these funds to build even more triremes, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of power. Their fleet ensured the safe passage of grain shipments from the Black Sea region, which was essential for feeding Athens' large population. It protected the lucrative trade routes that brought wealth into the city's harbors, and it allowed Athens to project its power across the region, intervening in disputes, suppressing rebellions, and effectively controlling a vast network of allies that became, in everything but name, subjects. The mighty walls connecting Athens to Piraeus meant the city could never be starved into submission as long as its navy ruled the waves. This absolute reliance on sea power fundamentally shaped Athenian society, economy, and politics, creating a confident, outward-looking imperial power whose reach extended far beyond the Attic Peninsula, all thanks to the wooden walls of its incredible fleet. But beyond the public temples and civic rituals that defined daily life, there existed another, far more secretive dimension to Athenian spirituality, one that promised not just favors in this life, but a blessed existence in the next. While the official state religion offered ceremonies for the community, a deep, personal anxiety about what lay after death led many Athenians to seek more profound personal assurances. This spiritual yearning gave rise to the mysterious and powerful world of the mystery cults, the most famous and influential of which was the Eleusinian Mysteries, dedicated to the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. Initiation into these mysteries was considered one of the most sacred and transformative experiences available to an ancient Greek. Unlike the public festivals, participation was not a right of citizenship but a personal choice, open to all who spoke Greek and had not committed murder, including, remarkably for the time, women and enslaved people. The journey began each year with a grand procession along the Sacred Way, a winding 20-kilometer path from Athens to the cult's home in the town of Eleusis. Thousands of initiates, clad in special garments and carrying symbols of the goddess, would walk this road together, singing and chanting, a river of humanity flowing toward a shared promise of revelation. The heart of the experience, the actual initiation rites held within the enclosed telesterion, the Great Hall of Mysteries at Eleusis, remains one of the best-kept secrets in history. Participants were sworn to a vow of silence so absolute that despite the cult's immense popularity for nearly 2,000 years, not a single definitive account of the central rituals ever leaked. We know the experience was multi-sensory and deeply psychological. It likely involved a powerful reenactment of the myth of Demeter and Persephone, the story of the goddess's desperate search for her daughter, abducted by Hades, and their joyful, cyclical reunion, which symbolized the death and rebirth of the seasons. Initiates probably endured a period of fasting and darkness, symbolizing Demeter's grief and the bleakness of the underworld, before being suddenly exposed to a dazzling, triumphant light and the announcement that the goddess had given birth to a divine child. This dramatic contrast, combined with the potent atmosphere, chanting, and possibly even the use of a psychoactive barley-based drink called the kykeon, was designed to induce a powerful catharsis, a visceral experience of despair giving way to ecstatic joy. This was the heart of the mystery's appeal. It wasn't a theology to be studied, but a transformative experience to be felt. For the initiate, it offered a priceless gift: freedom from the ancient fear of a shadowy, meaningless existence in the gloomy underworld of Hades. The Eleusinian Mysteries promised a different fate: eudaimonia, a state of blessedness and prosperity in the afterlife. This assurance was profoundly personal, offering comfort and hope that the state religion simply could not provide. The profound impact of this experience is attested to by some of antiquity's greatest minds. Figures like the philosopher Plato, the playwright Sophocles, and the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius were all initiates, and they spoke of Eleusis with the highest reverence, crediting it with making death not an end to be feared, but a new beginning to be embraced. In a city that celebrated public reason and debate, these secret rites satisfied a deep, private hunger for meaning, weaving a thread of profound personal hope through the brilliant, but often impersonal, tapestry of Athenian public life. Now, let's turn from the collective rituals of the theater and the mysteries to a much more personal form of inquiry, one that unfolded not on a stage but in the streets, and that challenged not myths but the minds of individual Athenians themselves. To truly grasp the intellectual energy of this city, we must meet its most famous and most troublesome citizen, the philosopher Socrates. Unlike the great builders or generals, Socrates left behind no writings, no monuments. His legacy was etched not in stone, but in the minds of his followers and in the very method of thinking he pioneered. You wouldn't find him in a lecture hall, you'd find him in the agora, a stout, somewhat homely man with a curious habit of stopping people to ask them seemingly simple questions. His appearance was distinctive, often described as resembling a satyr, with a broad, flat nose and bulging eyes, yet his physical presence was utterly eclipsed by the power of his mind and the intensity of his conversation. His approach, which would become known as the Socratic method or dialectic, was deceptively simple yet radically transformative. It began not with a statement but with a question. He would approach a recognized expert, a politician renowned for his justice, a poet praised for his wisdom, or a craftsman celebrated for his skill, and with genuine curiosity, ask them to define a fundamental concept like courage, piety, or beauty. The expert would confidently offer a conventional definition, but Socrates, through a series of further pointed questions, would gently expose the contradictions, ambiguities, and flaws in their reasoning. He wasn't seeking to humiliate them, but to demonstrate that the knowledge they took for granted was actually unexamined and unreliable opinion. He famously claimed that his wisdom lay in one thing alone, knowing that he knew nothing. This process of rigorous cross-examination, the elenchus, was meant to clear away the debris of false certainty, creating the intellectual space for genuine understanding to emerge. It was a philosophical cleansing, a way to awaken his fellow citizens from their dogmatic slumber and encourage them to think for themselves. This method made him incredibly popular with the ambitious young men of Athens' elite families. They flocked to him, delighted to watch him dissect the pretensions of their elders and energized by his insistence on questioning every tradition and custom. To them, he was a liberator, a guide toward a life lived according to reason and examined principles rather than blind habit. However, to much of Athenian society, particularly the established figures he often questioned, Socrates was a deeply subversive and dangerous figure. In a culture that valued public reputation and social harmony, his relentless questioning was seen as disrespectful, impious, and corrosive to the values that held the city together. He was accused of making the weaker argument appear the stronger, a skill taught by the sophists whom he actually criticized. Worse, in the fragile political atmosphere of Athens following its defeat in the Peloponnesian War, his associations looked suspicious. Two of his most infamous former followers, Alcibiades and Critias, had done tremendous damage to the city. Alcibiades was a brilliant but treacherous general who defected to Sparta, and Critias became the cruel leader of the bloody 30 tyrants who terrorized Athens after the war. Though Socrates himself had defiantly refused to carry out an illegal order from the tyrants, his critics could easily paint him as a corrupting influence, a teacher of tyrants and traitors. The tensions his philosophy created finally came to a head in the year 399 before the Common Era, when an elderly Socrates, then about 70 years old, was put on trial. The charges against him were twofold: impiety, for not believing in the city's gods and for introducing new divinities, and corrupting the youth of Athens. His defense, as recounted by his student Plato, was a masterpiece of principled defiance. Rather than appease the jury of 501 Athenian citizens, he used the occasion not to beg for his life, but to explain his life's mission. He compared himself to a gadfly, a persistent insect that bites a noble but sluggish horse, stirring it into action. He argued that by constantly questioning and provoking the city, he was performing a vital service, preventing Athens from becoming complacent and intellectually lazy. He declared that an unexamined life was not worth living for a human being. His commitment to his philosophical duty was absolute. He told the jury that even if they acquitted him on the condition that he stop philosophizing, he would disobey, honoring his divine calling over their human law. Found guilty by a narrow margin, he was sentenced to death by drinking a poisonous brew of hemlock, a fate he accepted with stunning calm and grace, discussing the immortality of the soul with his friends until the very end. His execution, the city putting its wisest citizen to death, remains history's most powerful indictment of the tensions between intellectual freedom and societal conformity, a tragic end that would forever secure his place as the foundational martyr of Western philosophy. Yet the story of Socrates does not end with his peaceful death in that Athenian prison cell. In many ways, that was where his greatest mystery truly began, a puzzle that has captivated thinkers for millennia. Why did he make the choices he did? The charges against him seem, from a modern perspective, almost absurdly vague. Impiety, corrupting the youth, in the context of a city recently torn apart by a devastating war and a brutal oligarchic coup, these charges were likely a legal veneer for a deeper, more political fear. Athens was traumatized, its democratic confidence shattered. The city was in a fragile state, desperately trying to reassert its traditional values and stability. In this atmosphere, Socrates, with his inconvenient questions, his associations with figures like the traitor Alcibiades and the tyrant Critias, became a convenient scapegoat. He represented the dangerous, questioning spirit that many citizens now blamed for their recent misfortunes. His trial was less about specific crimes and more about a city trying to purge a perceived source of its spiritual and political corruption. The dynamics of the trial itself were a fascinating clash of worldviews. A jury of 501 Athenian male citizens chosen by lot listened to the arguments. There was no judge to instruct them on the law. It was a direct democracy in action, for better or worse. The accusers presented their case, and then Socrates had his chance to reply. He could have chosen a path of appeasement. He could have flattered the jury, expressed remorse, promised to change his ways, and likely won a light sentence or even acquittal. This was the expected, traditional route for a defendant. Instead, he did the opposite. He was defiant, almost provocative. He told the jury that rather than being punished, he should be rewarded with free meals for life at the city's expense, like an Olympic champion, because his service to Athens was far greater. He argued that by acting as their moral conscience, their gadfly, he was performing the highest possible service. This was not a man pleading for his life. It was a philosopher using his final public platform to deliver his ultimate lesson. To the jury, however, this likely came across as incredible arrogance, a blatant disrespect for the court and the city itself. It was a stunning miscalculation of his audience, or perhaps a deliberate refusal to play by their rules. This brings us to the most perplexing part of the mystery, his choice. After he was found guilty by a relatively narrow margin, the trial entered its second phase, where the defendant and the prosecution would each propose a penalty. His accusers proposed death. Socrates again had options. He could propose a hefty fine, which his wealthy friends were ready to pay. He could propose exile, a common punishment that would have removed him from Athens forever. Instead, he first joked that his true penalty should be a public pension. Then he suggested a trivial fine, an insultingly small amount. It was as if he was ensuring the jury would choose death. Why? Plato's account suggests it was a matter of unwavering principle. For Socrates, to stop philosophizing, to stop questioning and seeking truth was a form of spiritual death. Exile would have meant living, but living a life that was, to him, not worth living. He believed so deeply in the laws of Athens that he felt obligated to obey them, even when they condemned him unjustly. To flee into exile would have been to disrespect the very legal system he had spent his life engaging with. His death, therefore, was the final and most powerful expression of his philosophy, a commitment to truth and integrity that transcended even the instinct for survival. The impact of his execution was immediate and profound. The city soon felt a deep sense of shame, what the Greeks called metameleia, a regret for an action that cannot be undone. They executed the accusers, erected a statue in his honor, and the event became a permanent stain on the reputation of Athenian democracy. But its true legacy is far greater. The death of Socrates created the template for the intellectual martyr, the individual who dies for an idea. It forced philosophy to confront the relationship between the individual and the state, between truth and power. It inspired his students, especially Plato, to build entire systems of thought seeking a realm of perfect truth beyond the flawed and often unjust world of human politics. In a cruel twist of fate, the Athenian jury, by trying to silence a troublesome questioner, guaranteed that his questions would echo forever, a permanent challenge to all forms of authority and a timeless reminder of the price of wisdom. Standing before the Parthenon, it's almost impossible to comprehend how such a perfect structure was created over 2,400 years ago without the aid of modern machinery, computers, or engineering software. The construction of this temple was a staggering feat of organization, ingenuity, and raw human effort that rivals any project undertaken today. To truly appreciate its grandeur, we must shift our gaze from the finished masterpiece and venture into the quarries, the workshops, and the minds of the ancient builders who brought this vision to life. Our story begins about 10 miles northeast of Athens at the foot of Mount Pentelicon. Here, in the brilliant white Pentelic marble quarries, thousands of skilled laborers and stone mappers began the monumental task of extracting the raw material. They didn't use dynamite or heavy machinery. Instead, they relied on a careful and methodical process. Workers would first identify a flawless section of bedrock. Then, using bronze picks and chisels, they would laboriously carve deep grooves along a planned seam. Into these grooves, they would hammer dry wooden wedges. The real ingenuity came next. They would pour water onto the wood. As the wedges absorbed the water, they would expand with tremendous force, cleanly and precisely splitting the marble along the desired line. This method allowed them to extract massive blocks, some weighing more than 10 tons, with a remarkable degree of control, minimizing waste and preserving the integrity of the stone. Once freed from the mountain, these colossal blocks faced an even more daunting challenge: the journey to the Acropolis. Oxen-drawn sledges would haul the stones from the quarry to a dedicated road built for this purpose. The final, steep ascent up the Acropolis rock was the most perilous part of the journey. While we don't have definitive blueprints, historians and engineers believe a complex system of ramps, ropes, and wooden sleds was employed. It's likely that teams of men and animals, using capstans and pulleys, would have painstakingly inched each block up a spiraling earth and log ramp that wrapped around the sacred rock. The coordination required was immense. A single misstep could mean a shattered block, ruined work, and even death. Imagine the cacophony, the groaning of wooden wheels, the shouts of foremen, the strain of ropes, and the relentless crack of whips urging the teams forward, all under the relentless Greek sun. This logistical ballet continued for years, a constant stream of material flowing from the mountain to the building site, supplying the armies of craftsmen waiting above. And it is here, on the summit, that we encounter the Parthenon's most breathtaking secret, its intentional imperfection. The architects Iktinos and Callicrates, under the supervision of the great sculptor Phidias, designed the temple with a series of subtle curves and adjustments that trick the eye into seeing perfect straight lines, a feature known as entoses. The entire platform, the stylobate, curves slightly upward in the middle, a rise of about 4 inches on the long sides. The columns themselves are not straight. They bulge almost imperceptibly in the middle and tilt slightly inward. If you were to extend the lines of the columns upward, they would eventually meet over a mile in the air. Not a single block in the entire structure is a perfect rectangle. This wasn't a mistake or a settling of the foundation over time. It was a deliberate, sophisticated optical correction. The builders understood that truly straight lines would appear to sag to the human eye under the bright attic sky. By building in these gentle curves, they created a structure that feels alive, dynamic, and impossibly perfect. Achieving this without modern surveying equipment is a testament to their incredible skill. They worked from detailed plans and used simple but effective tools, bronze rulers, set squares, and compasses to execute these precise refinements. The workforce itself was a cross-section of Athenian society. It wasn't built by enslaved people alone, as was common in other ancient empires. While hundreds of enslaved laborers and metics or resident foreigners provided immense muscle, they worked alongside a vast number of highly skilled, paid Athenian citizens, master stonemasons, carvers, sculptors, and carpenters. This project was a massive public works program funded by the treasury of the Delian League, and it put a significant portion of the city's population to work. It was a point of civic pride. The construction, which lasted only 9 years from start to substantial completion, an astonishingly short time for such an undertaking, was a symbol of Athenian collective will and capability. Every block was meticulously carved and fitted together using metal clamps and dowels, many of which were poured in place using molten lead to secure them. The final act was the application of color. We often envision Greek temples as pure white marble, but the Parthenon was a riot of color. Its sculptures and moldings were painted in brilliant blues, reds, and greens, and details were highlighted with gleaming gold leaf, making it a dazzling, polychromatic spectacle against the sky. The entire endeavor stands as a profound declaration of human potential, a physical manifestation of the Athenian belief that through reason, artistry, and collective effort, mere mortals could create something worthy of the gods. Yet amidst the grand narratives of philosophy, politics, and power, there is a more intimate mystery waiting to be unraveled, one that reveals itself not in the assembly or the theater, but in the simple clay pot simmering over a household fire. What did an average Athenian actually eat? The daily diet of an Athenian citizen was a vivid reflection of their environment, their economy, and their place in the social order, a world away from the lavish feasts we might imagine. The cornerstone of every meal for rich and poor alike was Cetos, the staple grains, primarily barley and wheat. Barley, being hardier and easier to grow in the Attic soil, was the most common. It was often ground into flour and baked into a flat, dense loaf, or more frequently, boiled into a thick, porridge-like gruel called maza. This humble dish was the fuel that powered the city, the basic sustenance of the working class, the rower on a trireme, and the philosopher in the agora. Wheat, a more prestigious and expensive grain, was reserved for a finer, leavened bread, a treat that clearly signaled a higher status on the dinner table. But a meal was not complete without opson, the relish, the accompaniment that gave the staple its flavor. And here, the Mediterranean triad reigned supreme: the olive, the grape, and the fig. Olives were a constant presence, pressed into golden green oil that was used for cooking, for dressing, for lighting lamps, and even for washing in the bath. They were eaten cured and salted, a burst of briny flavor. Grapes were consumed fresh, dried into raisins, but most importantly, fermented into wine. Wine was the universal drink, but it was almost never drunk straight. It was mixed with water in a special vessel called a crater, and the ratio of water to wine was a key indicator of the drinker's character and the event's formality. To drink it unmixed was considered the mark of a barbarian or a hopeless drunkard. Figs, dates, and cheeses from goats or sheep's milk provided essential sweetness and protein. For most Athenians, a typical day might consist of a simple breakfast of bread dipped in wine, a quick lunch of maza with olives or cheese from a street vendor, and a more substantial evening meal centered on vegetables from the family's small garden plot. Lentils, onions, garlic, beans, and cabbages formed the backbone of this meal. The true marker of wealth and status was meat. In a world without refrigeration, fresh meat was a rare luxury for the average family, typically only consumed after a religious sacrifice when the slaughtered animal's meat was distributed among the participants. Seafood, however, was far more accessible thanks to Athens's command of the sea. The variety available in the agora was astounding: fresh sardines and anchovies for the poor, and for the wealthy, prized cuts of tuna, elegant red mullet, and even decadent saltwater eels. A thriving trade in salted and fermented fish sauces like garum provided a pungent, umami-rich seasoning that was used much like soy sauce is today. The most iconic Athenian culinary experience, however, was the symposium, the drinking party. This was an exclusive affair, a gathering of citizen men held in the special men's dining room, the Andron. The event followed a strict ritual. First, the participants would recline on couches and share a proper meal, the deipnon. Once the tables were cleared and the floors swept, the serious business of the evening began. The wine was mixed in the crater, often by a designated master of ceremonies, the symposiarch, who would decide the crucial water-to-wine ratio and the number of cups each man was expected to drink. This was not a chaotic binge but a highly regulated social ritual. The proceedings were punctuated by games such as katobos, where players would fling the dregs of their wine at a target, by performances from hired flute girls and dancers, and most importantly, by conversation. The topics could range from politics and philosophy to poetry and gossip, all flowing as freely as the diluted wine. The symposium was a vital institution for networking, for political maneuvering, and for forging the bonds of friendship and rivalry that defined the upper echelons of Athenian society, all unfolding within the framework of a shared ceremonial indulgence. While the grand narratives of history often focus on the men who shaped the laws and fought the wars, the story of a civilization is incomplete without understanding the lives of its women. In the vibrant, democratic, and public world of classical Athens, the experience of women was largely one of separation and seclusion, a life lived in the shadows of the male-dominated public sphere. An Athenian woman's identity was fundamentally defined by her relationship to a male guardian, a kyrios. For most of her life, she would be under the legal authority of a man, first her father, then her husband, and if widowed, perhaps a son or another male relative. She could not vote, could not represent herself in court, and had very limited rights to own property in her own name. A dowry was provided upon her marriage, but it was managed by her husband, though it technically remained her family's property and provided a degree of financial security for her, as it would have to be returned if the marriage ended. The primary sphere of influence for an Athenian citizen woman was the oikos, the household. This was not a small domain. A prosperous home was a bustling economic center, and the woman of the house, the kyria, was its chief executive officer. Her responsibilities were vast and essential to the family's well-being and social standing. She managed the finances and the stores of food, oil, and wine. She was in charge of all textile production, an incredibly labor-intensive process that involved spinning wool into yarn, weaving it into fabric on a large loom, and then sewing the family's clothing. She directed the work of the household slaves and ensured the care and early education of the children. Her role was one of immense responsibility, respected for its contribution to the household's economic stability. Respectability for a citizen woman, however, was intrinsically linked to modesty and remaining mostly out of public view. The interior quarters of the house, the gynekonitis, were her designated area, and venturing outside, especially alone, was often frowned upon except for specific, sanctioned purposes. This does not mean, however, that women were completely absent from public life. Their most visible and vital role was in the realm of religion. Athenian women were indispensable participants in the city's spiritual fabric, performing duties that men could not. They served as priestesses for powerful goddesses like Athena and Demeter, roles that carried significant social prestige and even a degree of political influence. They were essential participants in public festivals and rituals. The most striking example is the Thesmophoria, a multi-day festival in honor of Demeter that was exclusively for married citizen women. During this event, they would leave their homes, set up camp on a hillside, and perform secret rites to ensure the fertility of the land and the community. For a few days, the social order was inverted, and women gathered en masse, managing their own affairs and engaging in raucous humor, a temporary but powerful expression of female community and religious power that was utterly vital to the city's perceived well-being. This world of the citizen woman stands in stark contrast to the lives of another group of women in Athens, the hetairai or courtesans. These were typically non-citizen women, often from other Greek cities or beyond, who were highly educated, cultured, and independent. Unlike citizen women who were valued for their domestic management and ability to produce legitimate heirs, hetairai were celebrated for their intellect, wit, and artistic talents. They were the only women who could freely participate in the male-dominated symposium, the drinking party where they engaged in philosophical debates, entertained with music and poetry, and formed complex intellectual and romantic partnerships with some of the most powerful men in the city. A famous example is Aspasia, the partner of Pericles. Though from Miletus and therefore not an Athenian citizen, she was renowned for her intelligence and rhetorical skill. Socrates himself reportedly praised her and even brought his students to listen to her speak. While citizen women were confined to the oikos, the hetairai navigated the agora and the andron with a freedom that was both enviable and, in the eyes of society, deeply transgressive. Their existence highlights the complex and contradictory nature of Athenian society, which could simultaneously relegate its own female citizens to the background while celebrating the intellectual companionship of sophisticated outsiders, creating a fascinating, often hidden, layer to the social world of this ancient city. Beneath the shining surface of Athenian art and philosophy pulsed a powerful economic engine, one fueled by a combination of rugged industry, savvy trade, and a revolutionary form of money. This wasn't an economy of abstract numbers on a screen, but a tangible system of silver, sweat, and sea lanes that connected this small city-state to the entire known world. At the very foundation of this financial power lay a stark and brutal reality: the silver mines at Laurium. Located in the arid hills of southern Attica, these mines were the economic lifeline of the city, a state-owned operation that generated staggering wealth. The work was done almost entirely by enslaved people, thousands of them living and dying in horrific conditions. They would descend into narrow, suffocating, pitch-black tunnels, hacking at the rock face by the faint light of small oil lamps. The air was thick with dust and the constant threat of tunnel collapse. This was an industry built on immense human suffering, but the silver it produced was the essential ingredient for Athenian supremacy. It was from this very silver that Athens minted its most famous export and symbol of reliability, the owl tetradrachm. This coin, about the size of a modern half-dollar, was more than just currency. It was a potent piece of propaganda and the dollar of the ancient Mediterranean. On one side, it featured the profile of the goddess Athena, the city's divine patron. On the reverse, her sacred animal, the owl, stood with an olive sprig, a symbol of peace and prosperity, under the watchful light of a crescent moon. The letters Theta, E, an abbreviation for Athens, left no doubt about its origin, but the true power of the owl coin was its consistency. The Athenian state guaranteed its weight and purity of silver with an unwavering commitment. For centuries, these coins were struck to the same exacting standard, making them the most trusted currency from Egypt to the Black Sea. Merchants in distant ports would accept them without even needing to weigh them, confident in their value. This universal trust gave Athenian traders a massive advantage and forced other cities to use their coinage, further extending Athenian economic and cultural influence across the Mediterranean. It was a tangible symbol of the city's reliability, a pocket-sized piece of power that citizens carried with pride and the world accepted with confidence. This currency facilitated a vast and complex trade network that turned Athens into a cosmopolitan hub. While Attica itself wasn't particularly fertile, its powerful fleet ensured a constant flow of goods. Huge grain ships from the fertile fields of the Black Sea region, modern-day Ukraine, sailed into the port of Piraeus, providing the essential food needed to feed the city's large non-farming population. From the forests of Macedonia and Thrace came sturdy timber for shipbuilding. Egypt supplied papyrus and linen. Phoenicia offered exquisite glassware and precious dyes, and the Greek colonies in southern Italy brought fine pottery and metalwork. The city's own exports were primarily high-value manufactured goods, beautifully painted pottery depicting myths and daily life, high-quality olive oil from the groves of Attica, and that most famous of all Athenian products, silver coins themselves, which were exported in massive quantities to pay for essential imports. Walking through the warehouses of Piraeus, you would hear a babble of different languages and see products from across the known world, all organized, taxed, and regulated by a sophisticated class of public officials who made trade efficient and profitable for the state. Yet this incredible economic engine did not create a society of equals. The wealth generated by the silver mines and overseas trade was concentrated in the hands of a relatively small elite. The richest Athenians, the aristocrats, owned large fertile estates worked by enslaved people outside the city and often served as the triarchs, the citizens who financed the costly outfitting of a trireme for a year. This was both a public duty and a massive display of wealth and patriotism. Below them was a broader class of moderately well-off citizens, hoplite soldiers who could afford their own bronze armor and small-scale farmers. But at the bottom of the citizen body were the thetes, the poorest class, who often owned little more than the clothes on their back. They provided the muscle for the Athenian economy as rowers in the fleet and unskilled laborers in the city, and their political power in the assembly was a constant check on the aristocracy. The true foundation of the entire economy, however, was a massive population of enslaved people who outnumbered citizens in some estimates. They worked the mines, toiled on farms, served in households, and labored in workshops, generating much of the wealth that allowed citizen men the leisure to participate in politics and philosophy. This deep economic inequality was the unspoken tension at the heart of the Athenian democracy, a system where political equality existed alongside vast disparities in wealth, all built upon the back of a brutal and unforgiving institution. Now, let's shift our focus from the economic and social structures that supported the city to the very force that protected it, the citizen soldier. In a world of empires and rival city-states, the security of Athens did not rest with a professional, standing army. Instead, it depended on the collective might of its own people, the hoplites. These were not full-time warriors, but farmers, potters, and merchants who could be called upon to leave their lives behind, shoulder their heavy armor, and march out to defend their land, their families, and their way of life. The term hoplite itself comes from hoplon, the name for their large, round shield, but it represented so much more than a piece of equipment. It was an identity, one deeply intertwined with the very concept of Athenian citizenship and honor. The panoply, the full set of hoplite armor, was a significant personal investment, often passed down through generations. At its heart was the shield, the aspes. This was not a light buckler but a massive concave disc nearly a meter in diameter, made of wood covered in bronze and weighing close to 15 pounds. Its unique design, with a central armband and a grip at the rim, allowed it to be held firmly, but its true genius was for the collective. The shield protected not only the individual's left side, but, when locked with others, the right side of the man next to him. Your own safety in the line depended on the courage and steadfastness of your neighbor, creating an unbreakable bond of mutual trust and responsibility. The rest of the armor was equally formidable. A bronze helmet, often of the Corinthian style, that enclosed the entire head with a narrow T-shaped opening for the eyes and mouth, a bronze breastplate, and greaves to protect the shins. The primary weapon was a long, heavy thrusting spear, around 8 feet in length, used for jabbing overarm at the enemy's throat and face, backed up by a short, double-edged sword, the xiphos, for the brutal close quarters fighting that followed. But the hoplite's true power was never as an individual. It was as a single component in a terrifyingly effective machine, the phalanx. This was a formation of profound simplicity and crushing power. Men would line up in ranks, usually 8 deep, with each soldier's shield overlapping his neighbor's. The front line would present a near-impenetrable wall of bronze and wood, with a forest of spear points projecting ahead. The ranks behind would add their weight and their own spears, pushing forward physically and psychologically. The experience of battle for a hoplite was one of overwhelming sensory assault. The weight of the armor in the hot Greek sun was immense, causing sweat to pour and muscles to burn. The noise was deafening, the clatter of bronze on bronze, the guttural war cries, the screams of the wounded, and the shrill music of the aulos, the double reed pipe, that some cities used to help the men keep time as they advanced. The dust kicked up by thousands of feet would choke the air, limiting visibility to just the men immediately around you. Combat was not a series of elegant duels, but a horrific, shoving match of brute force known as the othismos, the push. The two opposing phalanxes would collide with a tremendous crash, and then the rear ranks would physically press forward, grinding the front lines against the enemy, each man fighting for footing, stabbing with his spear over or under the shields, and hoping the line did not break. This style of warfare was inextricably linked to the Athenian ideal of citizenship. Only those who could afford the hoplite panoply, the zougeti class and above, were obligated to serve in this way. Military service was a direct extension of political participation. The man who was willing to stand in the line and risk his life for the polis had earned the right to have a voice in its assembly. The ultimate virtue for a hoplite was not reckless aggression but andreia, a word we translate as courage but which more accurately means manly excellence, embodied by standing your ground, holding the line, and protecting the man beside you. To abandon your position, to drop your shield and run, was the ultimate disgrace, a public shame that spoke of cowardice and a failure in your duty to the community. The poetry of Tyrtaeus from Sparta, though from a rival city, was sung across Greece and captures the ethos perfectly. A beautiful death in the front ranks, fighting for his country, was the highest honor for a young man. For an Athenian, the phalanx was democracy in its most visceral form, a brutal equality where every man's life depended on the man next to him, and where the collective will, discipline, and courage of the citizen body directly determined the survival of the state itself. Yet this brilliant and resilient society, for all its military might and philosophical prowess, was not immune to the most indiscriminate of enemies. In the second year of the Great War with Sparta, a horror descended upon the city that would test its institutions, its spirit, and its very humanity in ways no foreign army ever could. It began, the historian Thucydides tells us, with a rumor of disease in the ports of Piraeus, perhaps arriving on a grain ship from Egypt. From there, it swept through the densely packed population with terrifying speed, unleashing what became known as the Plague of Athens, a catastrophe that would claim perhaps a third of the city's people and leave an indelible scar on its golden age. Thucydides himself survived the illness, and he made it his mission to document its course with the dispassionate eye of a scientist, leaving us a clinical and horrifying record of a society unraveling. His description of the symptoms reads like a catalogue from a nightmare. It began suddenly with a fierce burning sensation in the head, reddened and inflamed eyes, and a throat and tongue bleeding from the intense heat. This progressed to violent coughing and sneezing, followed by wrenching stomach pains and vomiting of every kind of bile physicians had named. The victims were then seized by convulsions and a raging, unquenchable thirst that drove them to throw themselves into water cisterns, though it provided no relief. Their skin was covered in small pustules and ulcers, and a terrible restlessness made it impossible to sleep. Internally, the fever was so consuming that victims could not bear even the lightest cloth on their skin, choosing instead to lie naked on cool surfaces. Most horrifying of all was the mental state. Many retained their full faculties until the very end, able to describe their own agonies in precise detail, a torturous awareness of their own demise. Death usually came around the 7th or 8th day. Those who survived the fever often faced a different fate. The sickness would descend into the bowels, causing severe diarrhea that led to a slow, wasting death from exhaustion. Survivors were often left with permanent scars, the loss of fingers, toes, or even eyesight, and a profound amnesia, unable to recognize themselves or their closest friends. The medical impact was devastating, but the social and moral collapse that followed was, in Thucydides' view, even more damaging to the soul of the city. With physicians dying as quickly as their patients and no known remedies offering any cure, a profound sense of hopelessness took root. Why follow the rules of a society that was clearly dying? Traditional religious ceremonies and funeral rites were among the first casualties. The temples were filled with corpses as people died too quickly for proper burial. The sacred customs that gave order to death were abandoned. Bodies were piled atop each other on funeral pyres meant for one, or simply thrown onto a neighbor's burning pyre when no one was looking. The very concept of honor disintegrated. As Thucydides grimly observed, people began to pursue pleasure openly and without shame, believing that life and wealth were equally fleeting. A stark disregard for law and the gods became commonplace as the virtuous and the wicked seemed to perish with equal randomness. The bonds of family, the very foundation of the oikos, were shattered. Fear of contagion overrode duty. Relatives abandoned their dying loved ones, leaving them to perish alone. The city, once a beacon of order and civilization, descended into a state of brutal anarchy where self-preservation was the only law that mattered. For centuries, historians and epidemiologists have debated the true nature of this ancient scourge. Thucydides' detailed account provides clues, but no modern disease matches it perfectly, leading to a fascinating ongoing detective story. The most popular theory for many years was typhus, carried by body lice, which can cause high fever and delirium. Others have suggested epidemic typhus, smallpox, or even a form of measles. A more recent and compelling theory, put forward in the late 1990s, posits that it was Ebola or a similar viral hemorrhagic fever, given the detailed descriptions of bleeding from the orifices and the extreme contagiousness. Another intriguing hypothesis suggests it wasn't a single disease at all, but a perfect storm of multiple pathogens, perhaps a deadly influenza virus that weakened the population, followed by a toxin-producing staphylococcus infection that caused the toxic shock syndrome described in the symptoms. The crowded, unsanitary conditions within the city walls, exacerbated by the Spartan siege, would have been a perfect breeding ground for such a horrific combination. The true identity of the plague may forever remain a mystery lost to time, but its impact is undeniable. The plague did not just kill Athenians, it fundamentally weakened the city at a critical moment in its history. It claimed the life of its visionary leader, Pericles, along with his sons, leaving a leadership vacuum that would soon be filled by more reckless and demagogic figures. The massive loss of life, particularly among the experienced rowers of the fleet, crippled Athenian military power for years, but perhaps the deepest wound was psychological. The event shattered the Athenian sense of cosmic order and divine favor. If the gods could allow such random, meaningless suffering to befall their most devoted city, what was the point of piety or virtue? This profound crisis of faith and the collapse of social trust created a more cynical, hardened, and ultimately more ruthless Athenian political world, one that would struggle to recapture the confident idealism of the age that had just been so brutally and so randomly erased. And while the Parthenon sculptures rightly capture our awe to see the true soul of Athenian artistry, we must look beyond the Acropolis to the objects that filled their daily lives. The same drive for perfection that built the great temples was poured into more intimate creations, from the clay pots used in a symposium to the bronze statues that honored Olympic victors. This was an art not confined to temples but woven into the very fabric of existence, serving both public ideals and private pleasures with unparalleled skill. The most ubiquitous and telling art form was vase painting. Athenian workshops, particularly in the Kerameikos district, produced pottery that was exported across the known world, valued as much for its exquisite decoration as for its function. These were not mere containers, they were canvases that narrated the entire Greek world. Early styles featured black figure painting, where artisans would paint elegant silhouettes of figures in a black clay slip onto the red clay pot, then use a fine tool to incise exquisite details, revealing the red beneath to create muscles, patterns on clothing, and expressions. The mastery of this technique reached its peak with artists like Exekias, whose scenes on wine cups and storage jars are profound compositions full of emotional tension and mythological drama. But the true revolution came with the development of the red figure technique around 530 before the Common Era. This reversed the process. The background was painted black, leaving the figures in the natural red of the clay. This allowed painters to use a brush, not a scraping tool, to add details. The brush offered infinitely more flexibility, enabling artists to depict the body with unprecedented naturalism, showing muscles with subtle brushstrokes, rendering delicate drapery that seemed to flutter, and capturing nuanced expressions and complex perspective. Pioneers like the Berlin painter and Euphronios used this new freedom to create scenes of breathtaking vitality, from the fury of Achilles to the quiet moment of a woman preparing for her wedding. These vases were functional art used at parties, given as prizes, and placed in tombs, making myth and beauty a part of everyday ritual. Alongside this revolution in painting, a quieter but equally profound transformation was occurring in sculpture, perfectly embodied by a work known as the Critios boy. Discovered in the rubble of the Acropolis, this modest-sized marble statue represents nothing less than the pivotal moment when ancient art stepped out of the archaic past and into the classical age. Compare him to the Kouroi figures that came before, those stiff, upright young men with their rigid poses, braided hair, and that unmistakable artificial smile known as the archaic grin. The Critios boy has shed all of that. His smile is gone, replaced by a serene, natural neutrality. His head is turned slightly, breaking the rigid frontal axis. Most importantly, his posture embodies the revolutionary concept of contrapposto. His weight rests casually on one leg, causing his hips and shoulders to tilt in a gentle, natural S-curve. He is not just standing, he is living, breathing, and thinking. This subtle shift in weight creates a sense of potential movement, a figure captured in a moment of life rather than frozen for eternity. The artist, believed to be the sculptor Critios, had moved beyond representing the ideal form to capturing the illusion of a living being, with a mind and a body that obeyed the laws of gravity and anatomy. This was the foundational breakthrough that would lead directly to the majestic figures of the Parthenon frieze and eventually to the masterworks of Praxiteles. This artistic genius served a dual purpose in Athenian society, eternalizing the community and adorning the home. Public spaces were filled with art that reinforced shared values. Bronze statues of victorious athletes stood in sanctuaries like Olympia, their perfectly honed bodies serving as models of human perfection and divine favor. Elaborate relief sculptures on stone markers celebrated not gods, but human citizens who had performed great services for the city, ensuring their civic virtue was remembered for generations. Yet art was equally cherished in the private sphere. Wealthy households displayed beautiful pottery, small bronze statuettes, and intricate jewelry. Women used finely crafted mirrors of polished bronze with elegantly decorated handles, and children played with clay dolls and miniature vessels. Even the dead were honored with beautiful funerary plaques or lekythoi, white ground oil jars painted with poignant scenes of farewell, often showing the deceased peacefully departing their family. This seamless integration of art into every facet of life, from the sacred to the mundane, reveals an Athenian world where the pursuit of beauty was not a luxury for the elite, but a fundamental expression of what it meant to be human, a daily reminder of their desire to create harmony, meaning, and a legacy that would outlast their own lifetimes. In the bustling, sun-drenched agora, amidst the debates and the commerce, you might have spotted a familiar sight from any era. A line of young boys, their hair closely cropped, following a respected older man on their way to school. For an Athenian citizen, education was not merely a path to personal success. It was a sacred duty to the polis itself. The survival of their radical experiment in democracy depended on a citizen body that was not only literate and physically capable, but also steeped in the cultural values and rhetorical skills needed to debate, to judge, and to lead. From around the age of 7, a boy from a citizen family would begin his formal schooling, a journey that aimed to mold him into a kolos kagathos, a noble and good man, harmoniously developed in mind, body, and character. His education was a private affair paid for by his family, and it typically revolved around 3 core pillars: letters, music, and gymnastics. His first stop was the school of the grammatists, the teacher of letters. Here, the primary goal was functional literacy and numeracy, the essential tools for any man who might one day manage an estate, engage in commerce, or read the laws proposed in the assembly. Students learned to read and write by painstakingly copying passages from the great epic poets, Homer above all. The Iliad and the Odyssey were not just stories, they were the foundational texts of Greek culture, a repository of heroes, gods, and moral dilemmas. By memorizing and reciting these verses, a boy absorbed the core values of courage, honor, and piety. He learned to calculate using an abacus and to play with the complex Greek number system, skills vital for the financial management expected of any head of a household. This education was rigorous, often enforced with a swift strike from the teacher's cane, instilling discipline alongside knowledge. From the school of the grammatists, the boy would then go to the kitharist, the music teacher. In the ancient world, music or mouseike encompassed far more than just melody. It was the realm of the muses, including poetry, dance, and the cultivation of the soul. A boy learned to play the lyre, a 7-stringed instrument, and to sing the poetic works of masters like Sappho or Pindar. This was not for entertainment alone. The Athenians believed that the rhythms and harmonies of music had a direct effect on a person's ethos or character. Certain modes were thought to inspire bravery and discipline, while others could encourage laziness or licentiousness. Mastering an instrument required coordination, patience, and an appreciation for order and proportion qualities that were seen as directly transferable to the orderly functioning of a citizen in the assembly or a hoplite in the phalanx. Music taught a young man to find harmony within himself, which was the first step toward creating harmony within the city. The third, and equally vital, part of his day was spent at the Palestra, the wrestling school. Here, under the guidance of the Paedotribes, the gymnastics teacher, the focus shifted entirely to the body. A citizen's duty included being ready to don his armor and defend the state, and physical excellence was therefore a civic obligation. The Palestra was an open courtyard surrounded by rooms for bathing and storing oil. Boys would exercise naked, coating their skin in olive oil to keep it supple and to make holds more difficult for an opponent. They trained in the core events of Greek athletics: wrestling, a test of strength and technique; the pankration, a brutal combination of wrestling and boxing with almost no rules; running, both for speed and for endurance in armor; and the long jump performed with weights called halters to increase momentum. This training was about more than building muscle. It was about instilling arete, excellence, and the resilience to endure hardship. It taught a boy to compete fairly, to respect his opponents, and to graciously accept either victory or defeat, a crucial lesson for the political contests he would face as an adult. As a boy grew into a young man around the age of 16, his education would evolve to meet the sophisticated demands of the democracy. For those from wealthier families, this next stage was the most crucial: the study of rhetoric and philosophy. In a society where persuasive speech in the assembly or the law courts could determine state policy or a man's very life, the power of words was paramount. Young men would seek out sophists, itinerant teachers of wisdom, or study with philosophers like Socrates, learning the art of argument, logic, and public speaking. They would practice composing and delivering speeches on both sides of an issue, honing their ability to persuade a mass audience. This training in rhetoric was the finishing school for the Athenian elite, producing the orators and statesmen who would lead the city. It was the ultimate expression of the educational ideal: to create a man who could think critically, speak persuasively, fight bravely, and appreciate beauty, a citizen fully prepared to contribute his voice to the great, ongoing conversation of Athenian democracy. For an Athenian, the divine was not a distant concept reserved for holy days, but a constant, palpable presence woven into the fabric of every single day. Their world was alive with gods, a sprawling, contentious, and deeply human family residing on Mount Olympus, each governing a domain of nature or human endeavor. This polytheistic system provided a framework for understanding everything from the changing seasons to the sudden onset of a storm at sea. At the head of this divine pantheon sat Zeus, the Sky Father, wielder of the thunderbolt and enforcer of cosmic order and hospitality. But for the people of Athens, their most intimate and powerful protector was the goddess who gave the city its name, Athena. She was the virgin goddess of wisdom, strategic warfare, and crafts, a tutelary deity whose gift of the olive tree had won her the patronage of the city. Her symbol, the owl, was stamped on their coins, and her serene, helmeted gaze looked down from countless statues, a constant reminder of her watchful presence over her people. This relationship with the gods was maintained through a continuous cycle of rituals, sacrifices, and, most spectacularly, public festivals that brought the entire community together. The greatest of these Athenian celebrations was the Parthenon, a magnificent festival held every year with a particularly grand version, the Great Parthenon, held every 4 years. This was nothing less than the city's birthday party, a multi-day extravaganza honoring Athena's divine patronage. The festival featured athletic and musical competitions, with winners receiving prestigious prizes of special Parthenic amphorae filled with sacred olive oil from Athena's own sacred groves. But the undeniable climax was the Parthenic procession, a breathtaking display of civic pride and religious devotion meticulously depicted on the Parthenon's iconic frieze. Imagine the spectacle, a river of humanity flowing through the agora and climbing the steep path to the Acropolis. At the front were the most respected elders, followed by Athenian maidens known as kainphoroi carrying sacred baskets filled with offerings. They were followed by musicians, soldiers, metics, resident foreigners in special robes, and representatives from every corner of Athenian society, including the sacrificial animals, a procession of oxen destined for the altar. The entire city, it seemed, was on the move, ascending toward the temple to present a wondrous new gift to their goddess, a meticulously woven robe or peplos, decorated with scenes of the gods triumphing over the giants, a symbolic reenactment of order defeating chaos. Yet religion was far more than these grand public spectacles. It was the rhythm of private life. Every home had its own altar or bomos in the courtyard for making small offerings to Hestia, goddess of the hearth, and Zeus, protector of the household. Before a journey, a merchant might pour a libation of wine to Hermes, guide of travelers. A woman in labor would call upon Artemis for protection, while a farmer would offer a portion of his harvest to Demeter. There were no sacred texts or centralized religious authority. Faith was expressed through action, through the correct performance of ritual known as dromna. The central act of worship was the sacrifice or thysia. For larger public sacrifices, an animal, usually an ox, sheep, or goat, would be led to the altar, sprinkled with water to make it nod in agreement, a crucial sign of consent, and then swiftly slaughtered. The internal organs were roasted and shared among the participants on the spot, a direct communion with the divine, while the remaining meat was distributed to the citizens, turning a religious act into a rare and welcome source of protein for the community. This practice of shared feasting reinforced social bonds and emphasized that the gods were seen as partners in a reciprocal relationship. I give to you so that you may give to me. This divine presence even extended into the heart of Athenian democracy itself. Meetings of the assembly and sessions of the law courts were preceded by prayers and sacrifices to ensure the gods' favor for the proceedings. Before a naval expedition launched from Piraeus, commanders would consult omens and make offerings to Poseidon, lord of the sea, for safe passage. There was no separation of church and state. The state itself was a religious entity, and civic duty was a form of piety. This profound interweaving of the sacred and the secular meant that to be an Athenian citizen was to participate in a continuous, communal conversation with the divine, a relationship maintained through grand festivals, quiet household prayers, and the shared, smoky aroma of sacrifice that perpetually hung over the altars of the city, a constant reminder that the fate of mortals was forever intertwined with the whims and wills of the immortal Olympians. Despite the cultural and economic triumphs of its golden age, Athens' meteoric rise would inevitably stir deep resentment and fear among its rivals, most notably the austere, militaristic city-state of Sparta. For decades, an uneasy peace, brokered in 445 before the Common Era, had held between the two superpowers, Athens, the democratic sea power with its sprawling empire, and Sparta, the conservative land power with its legendary army, represented two opposing visions of Greek life. This Cold War finally ignited into a full-blown, generation-spanning conflagration in 431, a conflict so devastating it would become known as the Peloponnesian War, a struggle that would consume the entire Greek world and ultimately shatter Athenian supremacy. The fundamental strategy of each side was a direct reflection of its strengths. The Spartan plan, devised by King Archidamus, was simple and brutal, a straightforward invasion. Each summer, the formidable Spartan hoplite phalanx, alongside its allies, would march into the farmlands of Attica, the territory surrounding Athens. Their goal was to ravage the crops, burn the olive groves, and tear down the vineyards that were the economic lifeline for the Athenian rural population. The strategy was psychological as much as economic. It was a direct challenge to Athenian manhood, daring them to come out and fight a traditional hoplite battle on the open plain where Sparta was invincible. But Athens, under the strategic guidance of Pericles, refused to take the bait. His plan was a complete inversion of traditional Greek warfare. He ordered the entire rural population of Attica to abandon their farms and withdraw within the safety of the long walls, the massive fortifications that connected Athens to its port at Piraeus. These walls created a secure corridor to the sea, making Athens an impregnable island on the land. From behind these defenses, the city could withstand a siege indefinitely, supplied by its mighty fleet, which continued to control the seas and collect tribute from its empire. The Athenian strategy was to avoid a land battle at all costs, use its navy to harass Spartan territories, and simply outlast its enemy, waiting for Sparta's will or its treasury to break. This was a revolutionary, almost modern concept of warfare, relying on economic endurance and naval power rather than a single, decisive clash of hoplites. For a time, Pericles' strategy worked, but it came at a horrific human cost. The crowded, unsanitary conditions within the city walls became a breeding ground for the devastating plague that swept through the population, killing perhaps a third of the citizens, including Pericles himself and his sons. The loss of its visionary leader was a blow from which Athens never fully recovered. The state funeral for the first victims of the war provided Thucydides with the setting for Pericles' famed funeral oration, a stirring tribute to Athenian democracy and values that stands in stark, tragic contrast to the suffering and moral decay that the war and the plague would soon unleash. As the war dragged on for years, then decades, a new, more aggressive generation of Athenian leaders emerged, men like the ambitious, charismatic Alcibiades. It was his bold, risky proposal that marks one of the great strategic mysteries of the war, the Sicilian expedition. In 415, Alcibiades persuaded the Athenian assembly to launch a massive naval attack on the city of Syracuse, a wealthy and powerful democracy on the island of Sicily that was allied with Sparta. The scale of the ambition was breathtaking. The fleet sent was the largest and most expensive expeditionary force ever mounted by a Greek city, a huge gamble of men, money, and ships on a target far from home. The strategic reasoning was to cut off a key source of grain for Sparta and its allies, but many historians believe it was also driven by pure imperial overreach, a fatal combination of hubris and the desire for limitless expansion. The enterprise was cursed from the start. On the eve of the fleet's departure, a mysterious act of vandalism occurred throughout the city. Numerous statues of Hermes, the god of travel and boundaries, had their faces and phalluses mutilated. This sacrilege created a climate of fear and suspicion, and Alcibiades, known for his impious and extravagant lifestyle, was accused of being behind it. Forced to set sail under this cloud, he was then dramatically recalled to Athens to stand trial midway through the campaign. Instead of returning to almost certain execution, he defected to Sparta, where he promptly provided his new hosts with the complete battle plans of the Athenian force. The campaign in Sicily, now under less capable leadership, became a slow-motion catastrophe. The Athenians found themselves bogged down in a protracted siege against an unexpectedly resilient Syracuse. Their fleet was trapped and destroyed in the city's great harbor, and their land army, attempting a desperate retreat inland, was hunted down and annihilated. The entire expeditionary force was lost. It was a staggering, unprecedented defeat from which Athenian power, wealth, and morale never recovered. The war dragged on for another decade, a grim, grinding affair marked by shifting alliances, further oligarchic coups in Athens, and ultimately, the intervention of Persian gold on the side of Sparta, which allowed the Spartans to finally build a fleet capable of challenging Athens at sea. The end came in 404 at the Battle of Aegispotami in the Hellespont, where a Spartan admiral launched a surprise attack and captured almost the entire Athenian fleet as it lay beached. With no navy to protect its grain supply or its empire, Athens was starved into submission. The long walls were torn down to the sound of Spartan flutes, the empire was dissolved, and a brutal pro-Spartan oligarchy, the 30 tyrants, was installed to rule the defeated city. The democracy that had built the Parthenon and championed free speech was extinguished, and though it would be restored a year later, Athens would never again regain its former imperial glory. Its golden age brought to a definitive and tragic close by the relentless, grinding engine of a war it could not win. At the heart of this vibrant, chaotic city was a political experiment so radical it still captures our imagination: democratia. This was not the representative democracy we know today, where we elect officials to make decisions for us. Athenian democracy was direct, a system where the people themselves were the government, gathering in person to debate, legislate, and adjudicate. The supreme power rested with the ecclesia, the assembly. Any male citizen over the age of 18 had the right to attend its meetings, which were held on the Phoenix Hill, a natural amphitheater with a breathtaking view of the Acropolis about 40 times a year. Picture a gathering of thousands, perhaps 6,000 or more, a cross-section of the city, farmers, blacksmiths, potters, and merchants, all debating the most pressing issues of the day. Should we go to war? How should we levy a new tax? Shall we send a colony to Sicily? Decisions were made by a simple majority show of hands, a direct expression of the people's will. To ensure even the poorest citizen could participate, the state eventually introduced pay for attendance, a small but crucial fee that recognized the value of every voice. Preparing the immense workload for this massive assembly was the responsibility of the Boule, the Council of 500. This was the engine room of the democracy, a body of 500 citizens chosen annually not by election but by lot. Each of the 10 tribes of Athens contributed 50 members. This use of sortition, random selection, was a radical check against the formation of a professional political class and the corruption of wealth. It was based on the powerful democratic principle that any citizen of good character was capable of and entitled to participate in governance. The Boule met every day except holidays, drafting the agenda for the assembly, reviewing ambassadors from foreign states, and managing the city's finances and military logistics. For 1/10 of the year, the 50 members from one tribe served as the standing committee, the Prytanes, living and eating together at state expense in the tholos to be on call for any emergency, day or night. This system ensured the day-to-day machinery of the state never ground to a halt. Perhaps the most fascinating and characteristically Athenian institution was ostracism. Once a year, the assembly would be asked a simple question: is there anyone who has become too powerful, whose influence poses a threat to the state? If the vote was yes, a second assembly was held. Citizens would bring a broken piece of pottery, an ostracon, and scratch upon it the name of the man they wished to see exiled. If any single name received at least 6,000 votes, that man was forced to leave Athens for 10 years. This was not a criminal punishment, his property was not confiscated, and his family could remain. It was a safety valve, a cool-headed, preemptive measure to prevent the rise of a tyrant or to break a dangerous political deadlock. Some of the most prominent figures in Athenian history, including the visionary general Themistocles, were ostracized, a testament to the system's ruthless commitment to collective power over individual ambition. For all its groundbreaking innovations, Athenian democracy was built on profound limitations that modern eyes cannot ignore. The definition of the people was shockingly narrow. Only adult, free-born Athenian men were citizens. This excluded the entire female population, all enslaved people who may have constituted a third of the population, and the metics, the resident foreigners who were vital to the economy but had no political rights. Furthermore, the system was vulnerable to the passions and whims of the crowd. Without constitutional protections for minority rights, the assembly could be swayed by a skilled orator into making rash, emotional, or even disastrous decisions, as the tragic Sicilian expedition so painfully demonstrated. The trial and execution of Socrates stands as the eternal monument to this danger. the ultimate price paid when the will of the majority overrides individual conscience and intellectual freedom. This system, for all its brilliance, was a democracy for the few, a fragile and often volatile experiment that balanced incredible empowerment with sobering exclusion, a legacy that continues to challenge and inspire us thousands of years later. Yet the influence of a single visionary leader can profoundly shape the destiny of a city, and no figure looms larger over the Athenian Golden Age than Pericles. To understand 5th century Athens is to understand the man who steered its course for over 3 decades, a statesman whose personal tastes and public ambitions became inseparable from the city's own identity. Born into Athenian aristocracy around 495 before the Common Era, Pericles received the finest education in music, philosophy, and rhetoric, studying with the pioneering thinker Anaxagoras, who taught that the sun was not a god but a burning rock, instilling in his pupil a rational, questioning view of the universe. This intellectual grounding would define his leadership, a style that was calm, deliberate, and supremely persuasive, earning him the nickname the Olympian for his aloof, godlike composure during fierce political debates in the assembly. His power was not inherited but earned through sheer force of intellect and oratory. In the rough and tumble world of Athenian democracy, where every policy was debated publicly, Pericles' greatest weapon was his voice. He spoke not with wild gesticulation or fiery passion, but with a cool, logical clarity that could sway the masses. The historian Thucydides, no sentimental admirer, wrote that Pericles led the people rather than being led by them, guiding the assembly through persuasion rather than flattery. His political strategy was built on a powerful populist platform. He introduced state pay for jurors and later for soldiers and public officials, a revolutionary move that allowed the poorest Athenian citizens to participate fully in civic life without facing financial ruin. This policy effectively broke the last vestiges of aristocratic monopoly on power and cemented the loyalty of the common people to his leadership for years. But his most visible and enduring legacy is written in the very stone of the Acropolis. Following the destruction of the older temples by the Persians, Pericles championed a monumental and immensely expensive rebuilding program. He proposed using the treasury of the Delian League, the military alliance originally funded by other Greek cities for defense, to bankroll the construction of the Parthenon, the Propylaea Gateway, and the other magnificent structures that would define classical Athens. His political opponents were furious, accusing him of adorning the city like a vain woman with jewels, using funds that belonged to the allies. But Pericles stood firm, arguing that as long as Athens provided security for the League, it had every right to use the surplus as it saw fit. He understood that these buildings were more than mere temples. They were the ultimate statement of Athenian cultural and political supremacy, a permanent advertisement of the city's power and piety that would awe both its citizens and its rivals for centuries to come. He placed the project under the artistic direction of his great friend, the sculptor Phidias, ensuring that every optical refinement and sculptural detail achieved a level of perfection never before seen. The depth of his leadership was most profoundly expressed not in a time of triumph, but at a moment of collective grief. In the first winter of the Peloponnesian War, as was customary, a public funeral was held for the Athenian warriors who had died in the early campaigns. Pericles, as the city's leading statesman, was chosen to deliver the eulogy. What he delivered, as recorded by Thucydides, was far more than a simple tribute to the fallen. It was nothing less than a definitive articulation of the Athenian ideal, a manifesto for democracy itself. He celebrated not just the city's military power, but its open political system, its tolerance, its vibrant cultural life, and the freedom it afforded its citizens in their private pursuits. He painted a picture of a society that was a model for all of Greece, where obedience to the law and respect for authority flowed from a sense of mutual trust rather than compulsion. This speech stands as one of the most famous in history, a timeless meditation on the values of an open society, delivered even as the clouds of a terrible war gathered. Yet for all his public grandeur, the private man remains shrouded in intriguing mystery. His personal life was marked by tragedy and controversy. His marriage produced 2 sons but ended in divorce. Later, he formed a relationship with a remarkable woman from Miletus named Aspasia. She was a hetaira, a cultured courtesan, known for her brilliant wit and intellectual sophistication. His enemies viciously attacked him through her, accusing her of impiety and of influencing Pericles' political decisions, even claiming she wrote his famous funeral oration. The fact that he, a man of such immense power, chose a partner not for political alliance but for intellectual companionship, and that he openly defended her in court, speaks volumes about his character and his break with traditional aristocratic norms. His personal life was further scarred by the plague that swept through the besieged city, a catastrophe his strategy of withdrawal behind the walls had inadvertently made worse. He watched helplessly as the disease killed his sister, both his legitimate sons, and many of his closest friends. In a moving display of humanity, he successfully pleaded with the assembly to legitimize his son with Aspasia, his only remaining child, a rare breach of Athenian law that testified to the profound respect the city still held for him even in their shared suffering. Pericles himself succumbed to the plague in 429, his death creating a leadership vacuum that would soon be filled by far more reckless demagogues. His passing marked the end of an era, the closing of the most brilliant chapter of Athenian leadership, leaving behind a city whose glorious stones and revolutionary ideals were forever stamped with the indelible mark of his magnificent and complex vision. And just as the vibrant noise of the agora feels most real, as the scent of olive wood smoke and salt air hangs thickest around you, a gentle pull begins. The brilliant Greek sun starts to soften, its warmth fading from your skin. The passionate debates, the clatter of tools, the distant chanting from the Acropolis, it all begins to dissolve, softening into a distant hum, like a radio station tuning out. The solid, uneven stones beneath your feet seem to soften, and the weight of the centuries slowly lifts. You feel yourself drifting back through layers of time, the colors of the past washing away into the quiet, familiar darkness behind your own eyelids. The journey is ending. You take a slow, deep breath, and the air is different now. It's the air of your own room. The sounds are the modern sounds of your own night, perhaps the faint hum of a device or the distant sound of a car. The physical sensation of a soft blanket, the pillow beneath your head, it all returns to you. You are here now, but something has shifted. The memory of where you've been is not like a dream. It feels more like a vivid memory of a place you have actually visited. You can still see the Parthenon's perfect curves against the blue sky, still hear the echo of a line from a play in the great theater. The experience leaves a profound sense of connection, a tangible thread linking your world to that distant, luminous moment in history. And that thread is real. The legacy of those Athenians is not confined to history books, it is alive all around us. Their physical world may be in ruins, the Parthenon is a magnificent shell, the Agora a peaceful archaeological park, but their intellectual and cultural world is the very bedrock of our own. Every time we step into a voting booth, we are participating in an experiment they pioneered, however imperfect their version was. Every time we engage in a public debate, value free speech, or serve on a jury, we are walking a path they carved. Our theaters, our courts, our universities, even our sports stadiums, are all direct descendants of the institutions they built on that rocky peninsula. The questions posed by Socrates and Plato about justice, truth, and how to live a good life are the very questions we still grapple with today. They are the foundation of Western philosophy. The contrast, of course, is staggering. Their democracy was powered by the direct voices of a privileged few in a physical assembly. Ours is a vast, representative system striving for inclusivity they could never have imagined. Their science was based on observation and brilliant reasoning, but without our tools. Their daily life was one of unimaginable hardship by our modern standards, without our medicine, our technology, or our global connectivity. Yet they achieved a zenith of artistic and intellectual beauty that can still leave us breathless. They teach us that human potential is not defined by technology, but by the power of ideas, the courage of inquiry, and the audacity to believe that ordinary people can govern themselves. So as you lie there, slowly returning to the present, carry a piece of that Athenian sun back with you. Let the memory of their ambition inspire your own. Let the echo of their debates remind you of the value of conversation and critical thought. And the next time you see an image of those majestic ruins, remember they are not just old stones. They are the fragments of a living, breathing, arguing, and gloriously creative world, a world that, for a few incredible hours, you had the privilege to walk through. Their time may be past, but their light, their legacy, continues to illuminate our own. And so our journey through the sun-drenched streets of ancient Athens comes to a close, but the mysteries we've encountered are anything but settled. We've walked alongside Socrates as he posed his unsettling questions in the agora, a man so committed to his pursuit of truth that he chose a philosopher's death over a life of quiet compliance. We've stood in the shadow of the Parthenon, a monument of such staggering perfection that its architects used brilliant optical illusions to make it appear even more divine, a testament to a confidence that bordered on hubris. We've felt the chill of the plague's indiscriminate horror and witnessed the sheer audacity of the Sicilian expedition, a gamble of such scale that its catastrophic failure still leaves us wondering at the mix of ambition and folly that could lead a democracy to such a brink. The enduring fascination with this civilization lies in its breathtaking contradictions. Athens gave us the radical idea of citizen-led democracy while excluding women, foreigners, and the enslaved from its processes. It produced art and architecture of serene, timeless beauty while engaging in brutal, imperial politics. It championed logical reasoning and philosophical inquiry while its leaders meticulously consulted a cryptic oracle at Delphi before making state decisions. This wasn't a society of perfect ideals. It was a living, breathing, arguing, and fiercely ambitious community, and its complexities are what make it feel so profoundly human and endlessly compelling. As this experience settles in your mind, I invite you to continue the time travel on your own. The next time you serve on a jury, cast a vote, or watch a play, think of the Athenians who first turned these acts into civic rituals. When you see a beautiful building or hear a philosophical debate, remember the city that elevated these pursuits to a form of patriotism. Imagine yourself walking that sacred path to Eleusis, feeling the pull of a mystery that promised peace in the afterlife, or sitting in the theater of Dionysus, laughing at the bawdy jokes of Aristophanes as he skewered the powerful. Your journey doesn't end here. In the comments below, I'd love to hear which part of Athenian life captured your imagination most. Was it the thunderous power of the trireme fleet, the intimate details of a family's evening meal, the daring logic of Socrates, or the sheer brilliance of the Parthenon's design? Sharing your perspective helps all of us see this incredible civilization through new eyes, building our own modern agora of ideas right here. Thank you for wandering through time with me. Until our next adventure into the past, sweet dreams.